that Inside Higher Ed article instead of saying, oh, you should Google it. Missed opportunity. There you go, contribute here. All right, the other thing that I want to say is that we are doing a live stream, and we've got Karen there. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
So, oh, wow, and she's live too. Awesome. Hello, 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 hello. Right. So, that's neat as well. The way that we run these labs typically is we want them to be as responsive as possible. So we'll start off with a quick little, hi, my name is John, and here's the question, the burning question or topic that I hope that we address today in regarding peer-to-peer learning. How do I get my students to give good feedback to each other, for example? I'll take that information, I'll write it down here on our Be Sure to Address board, and then as the discussion evolves, we will weave all of these together beautifully. Hopefully, sometimes, if we're lucky. Who would like to start with, hello, my name is, and I have this question. Heidi.
I'm Heidi, and I teach English as a second language. And I'm wondering what language or tools do students need to succeed in their oral interactions with peer-to-peer learning? By language, I mean phrases that they could use, hedging, ways to be polite.
This is, we talked about this last week, didn't we? Lauren, was that you?
Well,
or Heidi, you were there too.
yeah, I guess I already forgot that
All right.
I actually talked about that.
So, right, this is but the idea is, I'm a student, I don't know how to interact, give me some cheat sheet language things to start off to build a conversation that later on we can kind of build up on collaboratively. So I'm going to put that down as frameworks and scaffolds. For peer-to-peer. All right, great. Hillary?
Hi everyone, I'm Hillary. I'm an instructor and undergraduate student in the Department of French and Italian. And something I'm interested in is matching students of different levels in groups, or matching to higher students, or matching to we're on the lower end.
All right, excellent. Matching and pairing students. I'm going to put peers, and I'm going to put peers in quotes because sometimes variations occur, and Lev Vygotsky in learning sciences would tell us that this is the zone of proximal development, and that if we learn from somebody who's slightly above us, they can help us grow, but it also helps the person who's a little bit higher up in the skill level, because by rephrasing what they learned into teaching it brings everybody up. So that's good. How do we do that? Good, thank you. Lisa?
I didn't have a particular question. I'm an instructional consultant with the Excel Initiative and support faculty in course redesign projects. And some of the courses I'm learning are either have a team-based learning component or are interested in introducing that.
Okay. Are you designing both face-to-face and online classes, or do you have more of one?
Face-to-face.
More face-to-face. Okay, great. So some topics. Mallory.
Yeah, I'm Mallory Conlon. I'm a learning technology consultant on the Learning EW team. And I've done a lot of peer review assignments in Moodle and Compass 2G, so other LMSs besides Canvas. So I'm interested in other people's experiences using the peer review tool in Canvas. Kind of successes and difficulties in using the peer review functionality in Canvas.
I'm going to add to that, what can we transfer? So what worked in those, or what works in face-to-face peer review, and how can we move it to other mediums like online format and such? Sure.
I'm Shoko. I'm a training coordinator for EW Services, part of EW System. My old organization just dissolved at the end of June, so
Okay.
this is my new one.
Yeah.
Just-
In those non-time, in the courses that you do, which are non-timetable, are they voluntary courses or are they required or?
Initially, probably mandatory.
Okay.
Because it's a compliance-based training.
All right.
So
So, yeah.
bullying or sexual harassment or.
Peer-to-peer in compliance courses would be an
Probably
interesting sort of.
non-existent.
Yeah, because it complicates things. Peer-to-peer learning complicates things. Good. James?
James McKay, Learning EW team consultant here, listen to learn.
Very good. JT?
I'm JT, I'm into AT and French and Italian. I'm here to learn.
All right. And Margaret?
I'm Margaret. I'm a student at the high school and here to support John with the active teaching lab.
Excellent. Erwin?
My name is Erwin. I work for LSS as their teaching technology TA, and I don't know a lot about peer-to-peer on Canvas. Here's one.
Okay. Peter?
I'm Peter Adamczyk. I'm in the mechanical engineering department. I teach a dynamics course and a robotics course. And much of what I do in the robotics is implicitly peer-to-peer learning, and I want to learn how to structure it. In particular, echoing Hillary, how to structure it so it's not too asymmetrical between stronger and weaker students, or better and lesser prepared students.
So how to structure the work of it, right? So that it's not lopsided, so that one person isn't like, I'm doing all the work in this group.
Yes, and also somewhat how to call people's attention to the fact that this is intentional, that there be this interaction.
All right, okay.
That's right.
Very good. Duncan?
Duncan Carlsmith in physics, and I teach introductory physics to majors. There's various unstructured peer-to-peer activity, laboratories, discussion sections, and some structured things, highly structured around the laboratories, which I can talk about. Looking for ways to do it better.
Okay, so we already do it informally, looking for other ways to.
Yeah, I think our tradition is just throw them in and sink or swim in a group instead of structuring it so that they, not just like structuring it top down, making them appreciate it.
All right.
I think one of the issues I run into too is making sure that the loaner doesn't want to have anything to do with that. It's free to achieve the same things equitably as the people who engage. And I think that should be the choice.
All right, I want to do options for all there as well. Tarsha?
Hi, my name is Tasha Harrell. I'm a graduate student as well as an instructor in education policy studies. And I'm curious to learn more about, I find that my students engage more when they have time to think. So I'm curious about other creative ways outside of Think, Pair, Share to embed think time within peer-to-peer learning.
I like that phrase, think time. I'm one of those people that it's hard for me to think on my feet, and I like to process and then come back with things. Very good. Karen, do you have something written, or do you want to speak?
She says she's happy to talk about Canvas peer review. She's used it several times in her CalB course.
All right, so looking at Canvas peer review is helpful. Very good. All right, excellent. Thank you. So just to get started, what are some of the things that we already do that counts as peer-to-peer learning? I heard Think, Pair, Share, right? Think, Pair, Share, where we say, here's a concept, think about it for 30 seconds, come up with a thought, turn to your partner, turn to the person next to you or in front of you or in back of you, share it with them, and it's a sort of very easy, low-hanging way to get some sort of discussion in pretty much any type of class, whether it's a small seminar or a large lecture where there's not room to move around. They just turn to the person next to them. So what are some of the other ones, other ways that we do this?
Are you
What?
only on in-person sessions?
No, we can do this in online sessions as well, if you have ways of doing that.
So I use Canvas, the Canvas system automatically assign peer review and lab reports. Students respond very well to that. If they don't get their peer ticket because they're late, they like clamor for them.
So there's the Canvas peer review tool. How many of you have used that? Or tried using that? Explored it, looked at it, thought about looking at it? Okay, we'll dig into that a little bit more. Hillary?
We do some group writing in class, so collaborative writing and also informational gap activities, info gap.
Infogap activities, can you explain that?
Sure, so maybe in a pair, you would give two coordinating but different texts to the students, and then there'd be a set of questions that requires the information from both texts, so they're forced to work together in order to complete the activities. You can do it with grammar, you can do it with vocab, you can do it with whatever.
All right, infogap, I like that. That's a term that I hadn't heard before. Jigsawing is another way of or similar, probably related, where you can assign somebody one article, somebody else another article, and then give them a question that says, you need to pull from both. So they then teach each other, they do a deep dive into the one, and then they bring that back and they have to synthesize it with another one. It's a higher level Bloom's cognitive skill. So that's a good way to do that. And you can do this with 3 people. Once you get beyond 3 people, it starts getting a little bit messy because there's just too much information, but 2 to 3 people works very well. Other things, people, that we do already. Role playing, yeah. Assign a role. Can you say more about what you do?
So I'm in like kind of HR's topic, so conflict resolution, how to intervene in inappropriate behaviors, a situation, and then role play.
Yeah. You're the manager. You're the bad employee. You're the person who was affected by the bad employee. Get together and figure out what's happening. One way that I do this is I will have several roles for a controversial reading, where you have to agree with the author, bring in 2 more sources of information. You have to disagree with the author, bring in 2 more sources of information. Third role is to figure out how can we get along together. Fourth role is to be the troll, the internet troll, and that just brings us in. And their job is to sort of wreak havoc on things, and hopefully that builds some sense of how do I deal with people who are just negative in a way that is civil and professional. I see a lot of text happening there with Karen. Is she?
She says no big deal.
All right. Very good. Other ways that we are doing things right now, that we're doing peer-to-peer learning. Do any of you use Canvas discussions?
Yeah.
All right. Is that peer-to-peer learning?
Depends.
Depends. give me an example of it not being.
Well, when the students don't go back in and read each other's stuff and actually comment constructively on it.
Right. If they don't look at it, it's not
just
peer-to-peer learning, right? They can
throwing
share all
some
the
stuff.
examples. If the instructor or the grader is the only one who looks at that, then they're really not learning from each other. When is it done well? Give me an example of when it's done well.
Well, so well. I use
Okay.
Piazza as a form, just open, anonymous.
Yep.
So students have a problem with a problem they're assigned, or there's some technical issue, they post that, and other students can respond. Tends to peter out over the semester. It's not designed and structured or assessed in any way. But my students, they used to ask a question, and they'd have about a week before they could get a response from a TA. Now they get a 10-minute response time on a question, so it's cool. But I would like to do it.
Classmates.
Yeah, or myself, or the TAs, or whatever. But more and more of the from other students. But most of the students lurk, and they don't jump in, and they never say thank you.
Is everybody familiar with Piazza? Piazza is a program that is part of the Learn at UW supported tools. It is integrated into Canvas, and basically what you can do is you can submit for your students to collaboratively work on, almost in a wiki style if you want them to, a single answer. So you give them a really difficult question where they have to think and have to bring all of their input into it, and then they work together to come up with the correct answer to it. So, but it can also be used where a student asks a question and another student answers it, or several other students have a discussion about that. In many ways, it's like Canvas discussions in that there is that back and forth. In other ways, it looks way uglier than Canvas discussions, but it works so much better than Canvas discussions, much in the same way that Reddit looks ugly but is a very effective and popular platform. So it's sort of a neat way to do this. The other thing that's really cool about this is at any point an instructor can come in and say, I endorse this answer, or keep on going. Students can ask anonymous questions if it's set up that way. Or so if they are afraid of asking a dumb question, they can say, hi, I don't know this, and they don't have to add their name to it, so it gives them that freedom to ask those questions. Or they can respond with their name saying, hi, I'm John, I'm the class smart one, and here's my answer to this, and build up that sort of capital as well. So that's, yeah, Piazza's a good one. Somebody else had an idea of what they do. Yeah, good discussions.
An example for the Canvas discussions, I worked on a literature and translation online course over the summer, and it was a discussion post every week, and part of the grade built into the rubric was to respond to the post. So that was forced.
Yep.
And by the end of it, it was really good. They were responding to each other and working with different
What happened at the
ideas.
beginning?
At the beginning, they would do it, but it was very surface level.
Yeah.
Because they were learning such like a bunch of new material at the time. So.
And I think this is true with just about any practice that we do as instructors, right? If the first time we do it, the students are like, I don't want to do this. This is extra work, da-da-da-da-da-da. If it becomes part of the regular routine of the class, they get used to it, they integrate it, it starts becoming potentially better. Not always, but sometimes it gets better, and if it's done well. And Karen has a question or comment.
Comment. How you frame your discussion is important to fostering engagement.
So yeah, write down an example, if you would, Karen, or you can speak up, we can hear you. How you frame your discussion prompt is important for fostering engagement as well. Think about addressing higher level learning instead of just remembering. So this is a really good point. When we write our questions, and we talked a little bit about writing good questions a few weeks ago and evaluating learning. Is that 2 weeks ago now? If we write those lower level questions like, discuss this, it kind of doesn't give the students enough on what to do. Or if we say, post a comment on this, and then you are required to respond to 2 students. That doesn't actually give them a lot either, because they could respond and say, I agree with Duncan. Now, did that response build on anything? Did it add to the conversation other than just kind of being like a quick thumbs up, a like for that? Not really. One of the ways to build responses, good responses, and I'm surprised that I forgot to add it to the activity sheet. Maybe we can look it up. There are discussion tips, 5 tips for online discussions that Martin Gernsbacher put together. If we can do a Google search in our, actually I think a Google search will do that. But one option, for example, is to say, respond to another post in one of these 3 ways, or 5 ways. One of them, snowball. Take what they've built, or what they've put in the post, and build something on it, add to it in some way. Another one is show another perspective of what they posted. Another one, I'm drawing a blank of what some of the other ones are, but we can find that in our Google Drive, JT or Margaret, if you would.
Just so you know, there's a very easy way to always find that. guide for online discussions is linked in that AT guide at the bottom.
And you're saying that there's online discussions?
Yep.
Scroll.
In the AT guide, so there should be a link at the bottom there for AT guide. Yeah,
Oh.
so you just click in
More
the
guides.
guides link, and then
Online
there you go.
discussions, this
That's
one?
what I usually use is online discussions. Right there. And then at the bottom, there's a link specifically to.
Awesome. Hey, yeah. So yeah, this is a good one. Divide and conquer. Instead of having an online discussion with all 50 of your students, put them into smaller groups so that they don't feel lost. And that way, that group of 5 or group of 3 or whatever will hold each other accountable a little bit more too than they would if they were a group of 50. Direct traffic. So there's the dual assignment of posting your own comment and responding to another one, but make those as 2 separate assignments so that you don't have that one student who comes in and says, all right, here's my post and there's only one other post there, so I'm going to respond to them and I'm never going to look at this discussion board again. Say, all right, everybody posts by Wednesday and then by Friday you all have to respond. So that way between Thursday and Friday, they go in, they see a whole list of other people they can read through, find the one that they want to respond to. You can also say, if 2 people have responded to a post already, you don't get to respond to that one, go respond to a different one. And that way some poor person isn't going to be like, nobody responded to my comment or my post, I feel sad. Everybody will feel heard, even if it's a little bit forced sometimes. It also rewards early homework. Right? So the sooner, Wednesday after it opens up for comments on posts, they can come in and they've got the pick of the litter as far as which ones they want to respond to. So there's some good responses there. There's a link. Can you explain that link, Margaret, that Karen added?
It's what you were just talking about.
Oh, fantastic. All right, another one, assigning actions. Find 3 quotes that surprised you and explain why, or 3 quotes that annoyed you and explain why. So giving them, again, don't just discuss amongst yourselves, but give them a specific action. What's relevant to you, what's not relevant to you, why isn't it relevant, or why is it or isn't it relevant. There's more here that you can look at as well. But we'll go back to some of the other things. All right. Are there any other things, really good examples that we've seen or that you do for peer-to-peer learning?
I'm not doing this right now, but it reminds me, and I'm about to do it, I guess. So I have students read a lot of original journal articles, and for their discussions, like, give me the link to your output, and your response is a link that cited that paper, or backwards. So they have a very specific task on this thing.
So with their assignment of whatever result they got in their...
Read the post, and then if you pick that one, then what you have to do is, so there's a very specific thing you have to do. And these build towards, and they can assemble them into a research paper. So they collectively build their bibliography.
Annotated bibliography, sort of.
Right, and then they just have to write it all up, basically. So the work is done similar, and that works just so ridiculously well, I can't express it.
All right.
My students reading 50 original journal articles for 5 points.
So do they go and they find the articles themselves, or is that's awesome? All right, so that leads to what I was going to say. You have a course concept that you want your students to look at. Don't pick the reading for them. Say, go find 3 examples
that you like,
and share it with the class. Don't just share it with me, because I don't care. I've read a lot of these already, or I'm familiar with the concept. but share it with the class. Use something like Padlet or some other sort of upvote thing, or turn on liking in discussions and vote via liking which are your favorite ones that you found from other people. And that way you can say, wow, this one has 48 likes. Maybe I'll use this one next semester as I introduce the concept, or I'll use the top 3, and that way my students, and again, it's students finding things, applications or examples of the content. It's not you, so it's less work for you as an instructor. That's always a good thing. You're making the students do the work, and we know that whoever does the work does the learning. I don't know if you've heard that, but it's a wonderful truism. So, and they're finding things that there's a little bit of what I call performance, where they want to show off to each other that they've done that they've got cool connections and that they find cool things. So there's a little bit of like, I want to give a good example. I don't want to give a really terrible example. So there will be a little bit of I don't know if it's competition or if it's just a self-representation as a person who brings in good resources. But then you've got 50 original research articles on a thing that you didn't have to collate and that they've done the work for. So that's a good example. Same thing with videos, interactive simulations, whatever's available on the internet, which is just about everything now.
And I think maybe the tweak there's a little end game, right? So it's like we're not just discussing, we're actually trying to produce a product so it's going to help us.
Yeah, and if you can have that built towards that as a scaffolded piece of a larger project, that's another great way to make it even more relevant. And I remember you said last week that you do every assignment that you give them is a sort of high stakes assignment. They have to, it's worth something. You make it worth them doing a good job for it as well. All right, JT.
I have a question for people that are using discussions actively and frequently. How do you account for time in the course? So if you open a discussion on Wednesday and people don't respond for 2 or 3 days, what are you thinking? What are you, I guess the question I'm trying to get is, what's the distinction between peer-to-peer interaction and peer-to-peer learning in that instance where there are these massive delays between students because of scheduling their different classes, or they have lives outside of the classroom? How do you account for that in your, online space?
Well, I've got for one example, I'm just trying this semester. So we run labs, traditional STEM labs. And I was going to do didn't want to dump it, so I'm trying to address dumping in the lab, so they certainly know how to collaborate, which they don't. You got to teach them that, right, actively, and then give them credit. So I created a process where they are assigned for credit to go through a whole list of things. What are we going to do with the person who's left? How are we going to share information on their website? Blah, 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 blah. Long list of collaborative things that you wish they would think about. I don't have the resources to monitor their discussions, or I've tried that to have them documented, but I can't deal with it. So I have them sign off. I did it. And the assignment they sign off on it doesn't open until the lab starts. So they have to actually get to lab. That's a motivator for them to show up on time and early, because they have to have this discussion and sign off. And the assignment goes poof 10 minutes into the lab section. So they have that unique opportunity to accomplish the task and sign off on it. So in terms of this, you brought up this, how do you schedule that? And it's like, well, it's opens here, ends there, that's it. But it's a short thing. Right? So that 10 minutes. And so what you were saying, so this is an experiment. What I'm hoping is I'm going to run this 10 weeks until it becomes second nature. And
right.
You don't have to worry about this Mickey Mouse. It's like, and they all rotate through random groups of people, so they're meeting people all the time, and eventually they're going to be cycling back, and it's people they know. So I'm going to do it for that amount of time, and we'll see how it goes.
So to rephrase, if I understand this right, you give them the list of, here are the things you need to do. You, instead of checking on them all individually, you just say, did you do it? yes, I
Right.
did it, good, okay, that's good enough. Now, the next step, do it with this group of people this week. Next week you do it with the next group of people, and you rotate through.
Right, and the groups are 3 or 4, and you know, there's a conscientious person who's gonna go, okay, let's talk, and then that brings in the other. Right?
How
I
big are
think
your
if you
groups?
can go below 3 or 4 students.
Okay.
So if you go below too small, like if it's a group of 1, you got nobody to talk to.
Right.
If it's a group of 2, you might just blow it off because one's late, right? So the things, right. I had a whole program of checking all those things and trying to drill at each thing, but it's just.
It's a lot of work for an instructor.
It's way too labor intensive, and I don't want to overemphasize it because anything becomes at the expense of a million other things you want to do. But I do think that this is about the collaborative learning and support learning goal. And that's the experiment we're trying to do.
And I think that there's something about the agency of students. If you trust them, and if you tell them, I'm trusting you to do this, just tell me that you did it, and I will trust that you did it. And you will find out, student, that if you did this, you'll have better results than if you didn't do this. Eventually, if you do it over and over again, they'll figure that out, and that'll be a good thing. There's something about the agency here and the, hey student, you are responsible for your learning. It's not me. If you can get that across, has anyone figured out the magic bullet of how to do that? Get that across? No. All right, still working on.
I've never actually taught that kind of your kind of class. I've always taught adults in these little 1-day or 3-hour training sessions. So I've always been fascinated by this thing. How you guys would do that. You're getting kids coming in from all angles of life, and they may or may not want to even be in your room. I'm fascinated by that. Just it would seem
Motivating students.
It would seem the very first day I would do very little except just sort of read them the facts of life of like, you know, you're not here for me. I mean, I can do with or without you, but you're here for you, and you're putting your parents are spending a lot of money. Whatever, just kind of giving them that lecture to say you get what you put in, and if you want to be a B-rate student,
And there's that extrinsic motivation of I need to do this because I paid for this, or it's part of a compliance course that I need to get the certification for that. But maybe for some of these other electives, do I really want to be a physics major or engineering major? Maybe it's just a course that I have to take, maybe want to take, maybe I don't want to take it. Erwin.
I just wanted to know, ask the room about, this all sounds great. My experience, sometimes, you set up your discussions, and you had this very specific deadlines, and you include in the rubrics, you have to respond to 2 different ones, and inevitably I always find people who respond twice to the same person, or do all the things, and the first time around you're just like, oh yeah, everybody makes mistakes, and then you cave, and then there's this snowball effect that all this planning that you did, you have to throw out the window, because every week you have someone who did not follow the directions, and if you were to follow what you said you were going to do, then you will dog them points. And that, of course, at the end of the semester, you're the inflexible instructor who doesn't listen to my particular problems, and you get knocked down in your own
Student
evaluations.
Yeah.
So how do you guys manage this? 'Cause I'm very unlucky. I always get those students. And
If you're gonna grade or evaluate 10 discussions, maybe drop the 2 lowest scores, or tell them that they can.
yes, I've done that.
It's okay if you on 2 of them.
Sure.
Does that help?
And that's a big part of universal design for learning, right? Lots and lots of low stakes things over and over that slowly accumulate, so that if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed one day, or if you have a bad discussion, or you're late or whatever, that's okay. I've missed the whole thing. I've lost 5 points out of 1,000.
Yes, sort of help.
This is a similar suggestion, but the course I worked on had a makeup discussion. So there were 2 extra opportunities. So they
Sure.
either took the initiative and made up for what they missed, or they knew I missed it and I'm not even going to try. So maybe in that case, the students who are the complainers would take you up on the opportunity.
Sure.
And then again, that's empowering them to make that choice. If they want to game the system and say, I only want a B and I don't have to do this and I'll still get a B, so I'm good with that, that's fine. That's them taking responsibility for learning this much.
Also, Canvas has a facility I don't exercise and explain why, but it might work for you, which is global assignment policies. If it's late, you get docked 25%, or you code, and whatever. Right? So you ask them to do something. If they're late, for good reason, they don't get hurt too. You set it so they don't get hurt too much, but you can have the thing die at 2 weeks off, right? So after that, sorry, you're toast, right? But if you're late for some reason, you're sick. So it's not going to cost you a lot. But it's all programmed and uniform, and so it's not about you making the decision. It's not like you. It's like the computer did it.
Let's talk.
So it's them against the computer. It's not them against you. You just it's not my problem. I talk to the computer. So that's not a problem. I'll tell you why I don't do it is because I have an external entity where I do the same thing. It's Wiley Plus, and it has its own system. And the way there's an unfortunate feature, it's double dipping, right? So if they get nicked at them and then they get nicked again when they come and the information comes back to Canvas and it's late again, then they get really hammered. So that's why I haven't been using the Canvas thing, but I would like to.
That's the grading policy, the global grading policy thing that you can set in the new gradebook, correct?
Yeah.
I think, all right, so you have to have the new gradebook turned on in order to access that.
It's a new gradebook thing only, but I assume that's about to become the default.
It was
within a year, so that's going to
Next
be
spring, yeah.
next spring, so
right.
good.
This spring.
We'll have to get a little bit more information about that.
In any event, I think the idea is the less you're the go-to person and it's them against the system, that takes away some of
the animosity. Oh, it wasn't your fault. Your student evaluations don't go bad. The machine, we had to use Canvas. Those evaluations go down because the machine. Erwin.
And the other question I had is regarding matching them up.
Yeah.
Also, I have gotten initially I was using the Canvas, breaks them into groups, and 2 semesters ago I got this case of this student who did not want to be there, was very vocal about it, and he gets to work with someone who wanted to be there.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't terribly uncomfortable. So initially I said it was going to be for you work with the same person for a week or 2 weeks,
Yep.
I remember. But then I had to do something about that because it was incredibly unfair for the one person.
Yeah.
But then I had this person that said, okay, what do I do with him? I ended up pairing up with him myself. Because that what you guys do.
It's a lot of work for you.
It was, but it was awful. Who am I gonna give it to?
So
the second students and
so let's talk about grouping. What strategies have you had for grouping people together?
I use random groups and I love it because it's assigned every week and they just
and again, it's not against you. You didn't pick it. It's the machine again.
You got some bad apples and they aren't like killing one person because they get rotated around. And then they hit
so
this.
you keep them softly over time?
Sorry?
Every week.
Every week.
You kill someone.
Every week they're in a different group.
It spreads out the pain
right.
of having to.
But it does a lot more. It's about equity. There are all kinds of issues that this addresses. That people jump through all kinds of hoops, and it just like zeroes that out. It's like the computer does this, and so you end up being mixed up. You can't form a clique. You can't form an ethnic clique. You can't form a gender clique. There's a lot of things you cannot do because you are randomly assigned, and you can't dominate. And then what I mentioned before, there's training about what do we do with a person who, they didn't do their lab preparation.
Yeah.
We got to deal with it. We got to make an agreement. And I hope the agreement is always going to be, well, let's help that person out.
Yeah.
We'll never have to see them again, right? But for us getting the job done, we need to help that person out now, and that's the right answer, but they have to come up with that. There are a bunch of questions like that. So my answer is randomization is great.
I've had another instructor who shares great success in, she randomizes it for the first half of the semester, and then the second half of the semester she lets them pick their own groups based on the experiences that they had in the first half. And what she says she's found is that all of the people who want to do group work find each other. And they do group work together and they love it, right? Because you've got people that are enthusiastic about it. And the people who hate doing group work, they find each other too, and that way they've got a common thing where they have to do group work, but they also do a lot better at the group work because they're not balanced against the go-getter person. You know, they're sort of, they've found the level that they work at, but regardless of whether they like doing group work or hate doing group work, they both do better than if they just are randomly assigned when they are.
That's kind of what I see too. So you end up with the loners, and the loners together, they're fine. They both just go do their thing, but they're sitting next to each other, right? And they should be able to do that. That's their right.
All right. Karen wants to address peer review in Canvas. Karen, do you have a course that you can bring up on screen here? Would that be an okay thing to do? Or can you?
Unfortunately, no, I do not.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it. I'm glad that you're talking because that's much easier than if I'm reading. So let's talk about peer review in Canvas. Raise your hand again if you've done it or thought about it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. Excellent. What do you have to say about it, Karen?
So I've used it when teaching a CommB course. So obviously a lot of writing and communication is the underlying skill to develop there. So being able to give critical feedback is yet another skill they're developing by doing the peer review. So to speak a little bit more directly to the Canvas peer review tool, the first thing I will say is get students familiar with the, what do I call it, the rendering software, the
speed grader.
Yeah, and like how you overlay, instead of downloading a document, a Word document, and using comments and doing track changes, you can, when you set up peer review using the tool in Canvas, students will have direct access to the submission of their peer in Canvas and will be able to use the same feedback tools that we are able to use when we grade student work. So I think that's one of the first things. If you want it to work pretty seamlessly, you have to make sure students know of it and know how to use it. So I've simply shared the Canvas guides on how to use that tool with the students, and they've already had previous assignments that I have graded, so they've seen me use that tool and know how it works and what it looks like. So that's one of the things. The other big thing that's, I think, important is guidance. Students don't necessarily know how to give feedback, constructive feedback. So one, I've modeled that in previous assignments before we get to the peer review of the full paper. But two, the rubric that you assign to that paper, that can help them in terms of giving guidance. And so can talking about it. There's all sorts of resources on the internet. I feel like there was one we talked about, John, in a previous, maybe it was for online teaching, I don't know, but it was like discussion starters or something like that. That kind of stuff will help them to know what kinds of things to say. But it's really just being clear on what the expectations both of the assignment are, making sure students understand that, and then making sure they know what's expected of their review behaviors.
And I want to interject here. I've got up on the screen here the Writing Across the Curriculum, their source book. It's available online now as a PDF. It's like 300 some pages. Lots and lots of examples of all kinds of things, writing assignment related, which can parallel and inform other types of assignments as well. So if you're thinking about creating a rubric, they've got things on rubrics here. Having the rubrics, having your students use a rubric to look at each other's papers really helps them a lot. It helps them understand what kind of feedback they can give. There are examples in here as well about how to do peer review, how to have students give each other feedback, how to do a lot of that preparation that Karen was just talking about. JT?
Karen, is the rubric that you use for the peer review different than the one that you will use for your final evaluation of the work product? Or is it a separate, or is it the exact same thing?
Right, so in my experience, at the time, I was a TA, so I didn't have the power over that. My answer to you is, in the case I'm describing, it was the same rubric for the official grading and for the peer review. In my ideal world, I would probably have it be a little different. However, the way the peer review Canvas tool works, it is attached to the assignment that students are submitting. And so why I'm clarifying that is, whatever rubric you attach to that assignment will be the rubric peer reviewers have access to. So what I'm imagining then in my ideal situation would be a draft assignment that's peer reviewed, that the rubric there would be a peer review type rubric, and then a final paper rubric, which would be the kind of official courts
So like
rubric.
two
Does that
separate
make sense?
submissions then?
Yeah,
You have to be two assignments, not two submissions.
2 assignments, each of them getting.
I'm adding to the resources from past labs here, the actual activity sheet from one that we did on Canvas peer review. So there's a lot more information specifically on the Canvas tool in this activity sheet. I want to also say that we've had 2 labs on this. In one, Tim Postgen talked about using it, and in the other one, John Zumbrunn in political science talked about using it. And one of the things that I keep remembering from that was, as an instructor, if you have your students give each other peer review feedback, not grading, but giving them feedback, oftentimes he says they captured 85 to 90% of what he would have had to say. So it's already done. A lot of his feedback they've already done. There are also instances where you have to go through and say they've given wrong feedback. So you can give feedback on the feedback and say, actually, your peers have steered you wrong here. Do this instead. So they won't catch everything, but they will catch some of the things, a lot of the things, and it can save you time. You still are needed, though, as an instructor. Erwin.
The last person
So,
thought
John-
was.
Oh wait, 1 second.
Can I jump in?
Oh yes, go ahead. She has to go.
Okay, so one other thing you want to consider is how to create, I guess, accountability around the peer review. So, all right, in the class that I was in, we wanted to offer credit for doing the peer review. So how do you do that? Essentially, you have to create another assignment item that you would give students credit for completing their peer review. So one thing to think about and might be like a reflection, it would be a reflection activity. So every student will have to do their peer review, but then they would also have to write up a paragraph on reflection. What did they learn? What did they advise? What did they suggest? Something to that effect, if you want to give them credit for doing that peer review. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. That's something you probably want to think about.
For a paper, I think a great way to do that is to not have the peer review on the final paper, but on a draft before the final paper. And then in the final paper, they can integrate, this is how I integrated the feedback that I got from my peers, or here's how I chose not to do it, or here's why I chose not to integrate this piece, here's why I chose to do this one, and here's how I did do that. I think that peer review on a final paper, oftentimes the students are like, it's done, I'm never going to look at it again, I don't care. But if they can look at it and they get credit for, now I have to do something with it, it's more meaningful to them and they'll look at the feedback. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, in the last few minutes, how do we add some think time into sort of these activities. So one way is to, in the peer feedback, if it's an assignment that's not face-to-face, in think, pair, share, of course, you're on your feet. You've got to think about that, and you've got to start talking right away. Giving them that time for thinking is really important before you just say, all right, pair up and talk about it. Take 90 seconds out of your class, time it, and say, think about this. Here's a reflection prompt. Write it down. Give them that opportunity. Other ways to build in some think time. JT.
Similar to what you do, I always have the agenda or the opening questions for the class on the board in the 15 minutes before class starts. So inevitably it has some awareness of what we're going to do that day. And then it's like, do this or consider this now, just to buy 15 minutes. I don't know if they're immediately attentive, but I think 15 minutes helps.
Yeah, if there's a way to build it into the class preparation, or even that initial, like, all right, as we come in, take a seat, settle down, here are some things to think about to get you into that space.
I've been trying to process all of this with a lens towards completely online.
Right?
Just to process it in a different way from normal. And I can come up with a million ways to get students to think through something before they would post.
Yep,
to
online.
A peer discussion or Piazza
Padlet,
or whatever
board,
you want
or-
to use.
Yep.
What I can't come up with is how to integrate that think piece directly at the time of where the discussion is located. You know what
In
I mean?
an
Like,
async-
I can give them a think kind of question in any number of digital ways, but then that think question isn't immediately followed by where the discussion happens. So if anybody can think of how that could be done, or
So how do you enforce that time?
right, and they don't just say, "Oh, I have to respond to a discussion,"
This is all asynchronous.
and jump into the discussion and start doing it. Like, how do you?
No, she's talking about synchronously now, right?
Synchronous online.
No, I'm talking about asynchronous. Even asynchronous online. If you assign students to do a discussion, they pop right into the discussion. How do you force a process where they do the thinking and processing
I see.
before they jump right into the discussion?
Computer glitches.
There's
You can go ahead.
I actually heard something about this from a colleague of mine who's teaching commerce.
Okay.
And there's a process that they're using to quiz the students. So they have a question. First question is a content-based one. The second one is, how sure are you of your
Ooh.
answer? And then depending on if you get it right and you're not sure, it directs you to another set of information reinforcing the learning. I thought that sounded really neat.
Yeah.
So that's like a branching scenario of some kind that they're building in. And then can you choose where it takes them so that it takes them to the discussion, or it,
Sure.
see that's where I'm kind of like, how do I
Yeah.
mesh those into one space?
Yeah, and I've seen two ways that instructors have dealt with this before. One of them I hate, but I'll still tell you about it. And it is word counts on discussion posts.
Yep.
Okay.
So, assuming that lengthier posts require more time to write, require more thinking on their part, and then also number of sources that they cite. So if you require that they have to cite the textbook in their response, or if they have to cite a personal experience, the number of actual citations that they put into a discussion post.
And that forces them to go out and look for these things.
Force them to think before. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, forces them
That
to
that
read.
one
The
I'll
word
buy
count one
into.
I
The word
don't
count
like
one
at
I'm not
all.
buying into.
But
'cause-
people like it because it's an easy way to be like, oh, 500 words, they've had
and
to
I'll just
spend.
repeat myself 500 times.
However, Canvas Discussions does not have a built-in word count thing for it,
But
so.
Google Chrome does.
Right, so you
do
could
that, yeah.
find an external tool that does that.
Is there not a way to like delay the opening of the discussion? Like you open it and then like 30 minutes later is when you can contribute?
Yeah,
That assumes
that's a good question.
synchronicity, or
Yeah.
that it's a synchronous response, and a lot of
Going
online
back to your
stuff is
question,
not.
Lauren, you're saying you're going to quiz them, and then depending on the answer to the
Well, I
quiz.
wouldn't a quiz that came up from
Oh.
what Hillary was saying.
Yeah, you
I
should
wouldn't
make that.
necessarily want to quiz them, but when I think of a traditional think, pair, share in a classroom, where you've got this think time before you get to talk about it with your peer, I don't know how to force that to happen. If I'm assigning a discussion in Canvas, asynchronous discussion in Canvas, I don't know how to force them to take that think time before they just start writing in the
I
discussion.
could do that internet thing where it's like, scroll down for the answer. And they have to scroll all this time.
Yeah.
Hey, we're out of time. Oh, but
I was, oh, go ahead.
as you leave, fill this out, hit a couple of boxes, write some stuff. Let's continue. We have this till 2:30.
Actually, I was thinking that maybe if you turn it into a quiz like that, and then the feedback is the link to the discussion.
That could be.
Like, do you read, this is your think tank? Do you understand this, yes or no? And then in the feedback, the link to the discussion, so that
As
we'll
long
have
as
to
it
read
forces them to
Yeah, yeah,
go
that-
yeah.
to it
that
when
will
you
do
give
it.
them the feedback.
That will do it.
Good.
So you say use quiz
Yeah.
to do that, a quiz module to
Right.
do that, but don't
Because
do
a
that.
quiz has to be answered.
Yeah.
So you give them the prompt, the thing that you need to,
Okay.
and then the response, and then in the response, once they respond, you can have them to see the feedback immediately.
Yeah.
And then your feedback is the link to the
There's
discussion.
the link to the discussion. That would, okay.
I would
That
love to see a
that would
course
put
that
those
is
two
quiz
together.
based. So all of the content is produced via quizzes. Compliance person, this sounds like your alley.
That's mine, Michael.
That's yours.
Because-
Do all of your questions,
because
all of your content is
in
in
your
quiz
quiz,
questions?
If I say
Do you wanna
like
show it sometime?
incorrect answer, it gives you like the text box.
Right,
You
for
might-
the
No,
Yeah.
they're all gonna be
Text box.
accessible, so I
Right.
don't.
You can put a link.
Map.
to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
there you
Yeah,
go.
that's what
That could do
Yeah,
it.
pretty much.
So you set it up as a quiz rather than setting it up as a discussion and there's
Okay.
Oh
no.
God, I'm so
We
glad.
crowdsource.
Yeah, good. That's what's awesome about this. On your way out, don't forget to drop your name tags off.
Lauren, I don't feel like this is a surefire way, but I think if you have if you have it as a requirement that the person that's posting or responding actually asks a question about the person that they're responding to, because I think that means that they have to thoroughly read it. It could mean that they have to